Hello, Susan Corbett, Custom Machine Quilter. Today, with something completely different, we'll be quilting a black hole. My client designed this quilt himself. He drafted his own pattern and went for it. And it was really fun and interesting. So, as usual, we start with stabilizing. I ditch quilted around the border, the perimeter of the black hole, and a little bit within, and then began doing straight lines, just following the piecing lines. I'm using glide thread in about like a medium gray, and then I switched to a variegated, which has a bunch of different grays in it. And now I'm quilting the background. I wanted the background to have a lot of movement. You know, that's wide open space, and I don't know what space actually looks like. I thought about it long and hard and ended up with like a really big McTavish for all the curves that go in all these different directions. And also I thought it would be fun to use that to quilt in and around the stars in this quilt. Those stars are fused raw edge applique. They are not finished. Since this quilt will not be used, it's a wall quilt, so he didn't feel like he needed to do anything to the edges of those stars. And I'll be talking more about those later on because there's more planned for those. But at the moment, I want to get this background quilting in. So I'm going for as much movement as possible and really good contrast. So those lines go in one direction and then the other. It's echo quilting, so you want to quilt in a curve and then echo it and then decide which way you want to go next. When I was first learning how to do this design, it really made me stop and think, and it was a really slow process. These days, it's not quite as slow, but you still have to stop and think about where you want to go next. And I find that I can't do it super continuously. I still do a lot of stops and starts. And it was real, I'm normally doing this itty bitty as a little dense background quilting design. And so this is different, doing it larger. So I had to stop and think, where do I want to start, and is it all looking the same? Because I want it to all look different. It's a whole lot of fun. Loads and loads of fun. So I thought one of the challenges in this for me was, since there would be a bunch of stops and starts, to make it look like it all flows together in a cohesive way, not like a bunch of choppy little disjointed portions of quilting. I wanted it to all flow together pretty gracefully. So I found myself having to stand back and consider exactly where do I want to go next, and do I want some sections that are great big and some lines that are little and close together? That's one of the things I'm always looking for. Contrast is such a big part of quilting, and there needs to be a good mix of larger elements and smaller. Lines that are wider apart and then some that are a lot more close together to imply depth and expansion. How did I decide like what order I was going to quilt in? Well, I like to figure out which thread I'm going to use the most of and do most of the quilting in that before changing thread colors. So I used a bunch of glide for the stabilizing and the straight lines, and then switched to this variegated. So I ended up using about 3 or 4 different colors of the glide grays, and I'll explain more about that when we get to the border section. In the fabrics you see out there on the border, there's various light to medium grays in the fabric print. In the background fabric, it's more of the same, just in darker fabric. So I didn't want to use black thread. It's hard to see what you're doing, and black can look really harsh a lot of the time. Most of the time black isn't what you really want. And so I ended up with this variegated because I thought that would help with the color, as it were, the light going in and out. I think that was the right decision to make. I had a hard time choosing. The batting I put in this quilt is Hobbs 80/20. As I say, this is a wall quilt. We didn't need anything special, and that's lightweight enough that will give us the loft, and it won't make it too heavy. I couldn't think of a reason to use any other kind of bat. I didn't want anything really flat, and I didn't want anything super puffy either. Does it look like this is taking a long time? Because this part really didn't. I mean, I would stop and reconsider, and then what takes a long time is little tiny dense quilting. The scale of this was so big that it just went by really quickly. So that was nice, because I knew I was going to spend a lot more time on the border. And quilting the lines in the black hole itself that was a little time consuming. It was tricky there to get the spacing figured out. One more challenge in doing those lines, I found that, I like to stabilize first and then go back and quilt for lots of very good reasons. So I had to go back in there and take a little tiny bit of quilting out, because the closer I got to the bottom, it wasn't straight. So that was unfortunate. I guess I could have basted the whole thing. I just didn't see that one coming. I didn't think it was going to give me any trouble, but it did a little bit. But it was no big deal, and that's just one of the things you roll with. So I'm coming full circle here with this echo quilting, almost done. It'll be interesting to see how the beginning joins up with the end, so you can't tell where the stop and start was. That's fun. I'm loving the contrast. All these curves up against those straight lines. That is really good. The curves of the piecing, the straight lines in the piecing, and all, this is just coming together. So we're coming up on having this part finished. And then that will set up another thread change. With every change in thread, type and color, you've got to make an adjustment for the thread tension, and that's just an ongoing part of custom quilting. And the changes here were not drastic. They were nice and little. Thank goodness. I went through a couple of needles on this quilt. Those need to be changed fairly often. Nothing on this quilt needed to be marked, which is one of the reasons I love freehand quilting. This is all very organic, very in the moment, unplanned, well, kind of planned, but I didn't have to follow a pattern. It's just lines. Curved lines, straight lines, some close together, some farther apart. Some little bitty lines, some long and flowing. Which is why when you're a beginner, it's great to practice and get one thing down, learned pretty well, so that any of your quilting designs can just be a variation on a loop or a straight line, a curvy line, an arc. Learn those basics and then what all you can do with them, and that's very empowering. There's a fair amount of backtracking happening here, which is just a thing you have to get used to over time. That used to really stress me out, and now it kind of doesn't so much anymore. But I'm not going for perfection. Okay, so I advanced the quilt a little bit. And this part is about to be over. Where to go next? And it looks like I meant to do that all along. Yay! Okay, now I've switched threads. I've switched to yellow. It's a vibrant yellow, the exact same color as the star. And I'm going to lay in some color here. With the ruler, I'm doing bursts of light that emanate from the star. And I opted for straight lines because they're on top of all those curvy lines. People ask me all the time, or well, I guess they used to more than they do now. I've left those edges of the applique raw. Can you finish those for me? No, I can't. I've got one stitch on my machine, up and down. So that needle is just going to shred the edges of those applique pieces. I quilted just a little tiny bit in the very center to get from one place to another, but I don't think they're going anywhere. It would be different if the quilt were, going to be used. So here I've, quilted some lines that are longer than others. The spacing just kind of happened. I don't know. I just tried what I thought would be good. This is where you trust your gut. And liked what was happening. Where the lines came apart a little bit, I went back and filled in like I'm doing here. So that was always an option, just wherever. And I decided to stop there and see if I liked it, and I pretty much did. You can always go back and add some more, but I don't like to rip anything out. So that's looking good. From here on out, it was just a matter of doing it over and over. Okay, so we decided to put this guy out there in the border. Long story, but we didn't want there just to be the yellow thread in the body and then no place else. So that is some celestial body that's out there in space that is not yet in the gravitational pull of our black hole. I looked at so many things online, lots and lots of pictures of space, and had a lot of ideas, but this border isn't all that big, and all the ambitious plans I had were a little too grand. So that little sun, or whatever it is really a swirl with, some solar flares emanating from it. And that's a really fun design. That is fun to quilt. And I piled on the thread color. I ground it in numerous times because that yellow was looking, well, for such a bold color, it looked very subtle in the border. So it's a nice little detail that is not going to take over at all. It's just a nice nod to the stars in the body of the quilt, and I think that's a great artistic touch. I think that was actually the client's idea. Not that specific design, but some other thing out there. So that ended up being our collaboration. Okay, so why I didn't do the border first, I normally like to leave the border for last until I know exactly what I'm doing. The client asked for undulating lines, like you would see on a patriotic quilt to indicate flag flying in the breeze, which I thought was a good idea, but of course I had to pile on. So I'm quilting curvy lines that are quite linear, that turn the corner when we get to the corners of the quilt. And then I'm going back in and adding some dimensional quilting, some little bitty background things, and some more echo quilting. And all that is to imply depth. And so here's where I need more thread color to help me achieve that. So the lines themselves are in a medium gray. And then I separated out some of the larger bands of the echo to do some dimensional quilting. And that'll be coming along here pretty soon. So this is just showing right now how the lines get put in. My machine does not like to quilt back and forth. The thread really breaks when I'm quilting right to left. So I did a stop and start at the left side of the quilt over to the right, and then tried to bury the stop in the little solar flare bands of that vortex out there. So I did these in parts, on the horizontal parts first, and then I turned the quilt later, repinned, and then, put the rest of the lines in. So I did a bunch of undulating lines, and then here I'm doing that dimensional quilting. And I picked a few designs, almost a swirl, and I filled in, here I'm feeling free to pile on the thread as usual. This is in a lighter thread color, so it kind of shines a bit more than the darker colors do. This is going to help imply some movement, some glints of color, some highlights and lowlights. I didn't want to fill all the spaces in with something, or it'll look like nothing. There needs to be some parts that are filled in and some parts that are empty. And in between, just some narrower lines of echo quilting. And this is all just a judgment call. I don't know how to tell you when you're done and when you're not. It's just a thing like, you'll know by looking. That part looks empty, or this part looks too full, or whatever. So here, all right. In custom quilting, it takes a lot of work, and at times you might find yourself asking, isn't that way too much trouble? No, that is not way too much trouble. There's a lot to it, and it's well worth all the payoff. So it's worth the payoff here to change thread colors. And I had to scroll back and forth because I want to use all the light colored thread before switching to a dark one, and that wasn't always possible. So a lot of thread changes and thinking things through and keeping track of where I am right now and where I need to go. So doing this little stuff here can be kind of tedious. If you don't like doing this kind of quilting, well, then maybe you'd pick a different kind of design for this section. The payoff is, how does it look in the end? And when you get the right light on it, you'll be able to see a lot better than you can here, I think. Here, the quilting is kind of hard to see up against the print of the fabric, but it'll all come together soon. So what are all these little designs trying to be? Well, what does space look like? Do we know? It was good to look at all the pictures of space online. So this design, I think, ends up looking pretty abstract, which is a thing I really love. I think that's great. Who knows what space looks like, not ever having been out there myself. I think this is good. So that was the right side of the border. This, I think, is I think this has got to be the left side of the border, the opposite end. So I'm doing more of that dimensional quilting. And this is just, collect your little pattern meanders and see what looks like fun. and drop those in there, a variety of them. And then the challenge, or one of the challenges, is keeping track of where you are. Sometimes I like to jump to a whole other different line and not stay within the same band of space that I was quilting. But then when you join up with some other part of the quilting you've already done, you know, I need to keep my wits about me to see where I am, so I don't, because I really don't want to be ripping out any of this stuff. Not when you're grinding in all that color. It's good to take breaks every now and then. You know, go look at something else that's far away to give your eyes a break. And do some stretches so your shoulders don't kink up. Although I find this stuff really fun and I don't really mind. I don't feel like it hurts to quilt. I know, you know, some people talk about how much, you know, how hard it is, that it takes a lot out of your body. I don't think it's that way at all. When I first began quilting, my feet took the biggest beating, just becoming accustomed to standing up all the time. And I don't mind that at all anymore. I don't quilt barefoot. Gosh, I think that's a terrible idea. I need support. So having the right mat to stand on and taking frequent breaks to give my feet a break is a really good idea. And take a break to figure out, you know, where I am and where I'm going, and, you know, what's about to come up. That's important. And we are getting there. So when I get to the end of a row, you know, to get from one place to another, if I can add just some lines of echo to fill in. See, I don't want it all smashed. I don't want it all dimensionally quilted. I need a variety of things happening there. So some of those bands of space are going to be empty, and others will be well filled in with a bunch of different things because, you know, say it with me, we want contrast here. That's what's going to make it look really good. Okay, I'm sick of quilting those little designs I was putting in there. Now I want something else. I want some variety. One, so I'm not bored, so that the quilt isn't also visually boring. I want another design, and this is just a little curved line. And this is still with the light colored gray thread. I'm looking ahead to where it's going to end up with the other side of the quilt. And just for something different and fun, I put another one of those little circular olive shapes in there so I can change directions with that little curve. This is good to open up your bag of tricks, look at your design library, and think, what fun thing would there be to do next? So here I've changed thread color. Now I've put a darker gray in here. And I'm just doing some little arcs back and forth. That is fast and easy, a lot of fun. You don't really have to think about it. And so with the space getting larger or more narrow, those lines get bigger or smaller, which makes them look even better. That's a lot of fun. So once I get all that dimensional quilting put in, then I can go back and evaluate and see. Do I need more echo? Do I need more? Is there enough? Are we about to be done? So I'm using this design to quilt space, but what else would this be good for? This would be good for water. I'm thinking like a river. You could use this in the sky. You know, I could have isolated some larger bands of echoes in the background and put some little bitty dimensional quilting in there. That would have been really fun and helpful, but there's enough going on there with the bands of echo and the yellow rays of those stars, the starlight, that I didn't want to put too much in there. And I knew I was going to do this in the border, so I just saved it for the border. Or you don't need a reason to do this beyond, it's just pretty cool, and you know, you could do it anywhere. This could be a background. Oh, shit. Oh, gosh. So at this point, I need to look at evaluating, is there enough of that stuff? Does there need to be more? And what I decided to do was echo around all the parts that had some little bitty dense quilting. I didn't like them just being up a band of stitching and, like it needed, well, echo is a very useful thing. And I just liked it better with at least one row of echo around it. Later, I'll go back in and pick out some of these spaces and just echo them all together. So it's another way to fill in without a whole lot of pattern. Not a lot, just a few of those things here and there. I do not want to overdo it. And here is the border finished. It has really great texture. I just love the way that looks. And here's the back of the quilt. I prefer backs to be really dark or really light. And this way we get a whole cloth effect. So pretty. Here is the finished quilt. I can't quite get back far enough to show the whole thing in this frame. It's 86 inches wide and I think 68 inches deep, so it's big. But what I am loving through the camera lens is the red and white center now actually looks like the inside of a tunnel, which is, of course, you know, what we're after here. And I think the lines, I think the lines were the only way to go, just to reinforce the piecing. I'm sure there's any number of other things that could have done that, and maybe curved lines would have been the way to go. But I like the contrast between the straight lines in the piecing and all those curved lines in the background and the border. I think that is really good. Here is the variegated thread I used in the background on that black fabric. When I ordered it, I felt pretty good about it. When it came in the mail, I thought, oh my gosh, look at all the light grays in there. That is really going to show up far too much. But I don't think it does. I think it's really subtle. At least it is in real life. I mean, you can see the lines here because the light is really accentuating them. But I love how the color goes in and out. I think that's great, and it's really subtle. I also like the background quilting that now looks like it's behind that star. I like the yellow thread on top of the variegated. I think that's just really good. I debated, is there enough yellow quilting on the stars? And I just left it the way it was because I didn't want to overdo it. Knowing when to stop is kind of a gift. I think that's good. Okay, and my celestial body floating around out there, I like the way that looks. I think it's awesome. So what do we think about the border quilting? I love it. That's one of my favorite things to do. It's a lot of fun. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm very happy with it. Okay, well, there we are. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're inspired. And I hope everybody else is having as much fun quilting as I am. See you next time.